Hello, and welcome to Table for Two. This is a special bonus episode of the Reason Roundtable, where we answer even more of your questions. I am your temporary host, Katherine Mangu-Ward, and I am joined today by the illustrious Matt Welch, my former boss and current cross to bear. Happy midweek podcast, Matt.
Hi there, Katherine.
We have a question today from Nicholas Wong, who asks, our dear HHS secretary has just canceled $500 million in mRNA vaccine funding. Billions of dollars in scientific contracts meant for academia have been canceled, sidelined, or ransomed. Meanwhile, the current administration is pushing for a moon base. While I am not a fan of the COVID-19 response and I am skeptical of the efficacy of the vaccine for healthy individuals, it did probably save some lives, particularly elderly and those with underlying conditions. Cancer research may yield greater breakthroughs. Space funding may spin off beneficial products and prolong the human race beyond a solar-centric existence. All that said, is there a libertarian case for moonshots? Scientific breakthroughs that are unlikely to be funded by the private sector. Are our friends at Abundance right? Matt, you love our friends at Abundance and you love moonshots. Let's talk about it.
Was there any reason for the final sentence of that email?
Yeah, man.
It's apropos of nothing except it's like stabbing my eyeballs. So I get that. This is a way of doing it. I don't know what your friends at Abundance have said about the comparative value of moon bases and such. But as Katherine has alluded to, the last great terrible headline that I wrote after a whole career of terrible headlines at Reason was a Good Night Moonshots.
So proud of yourself for that one.
It's so good. In which, among other things, I went back and looked at the actual moonshot speech, the first one, not all the 75,000 references and subsequent State of the Union addresses. But when John F. Kennedy was saying we need to go to the moon, it's a lot about how those labor unions better not get in the way. We're going to have to make sacrifices. We're going to have to not fund a whole bunch of stuff that everyone wants to fund. Sorry. We're going to distort economic activity and push all of it in this direction. It's not going to be pretty. Everyone's going to have to sacrifice. Go. It's an interesting kind of talk that almost no discussion especially in State of the Union addresses, Joe Biden's cancer moonshot and whatnot, ever hint at a sacrifice. It's just like, we used to build, the Grand Coulee Dam, and now we don't. So let's do a moonshot about, microchips or whatever. People are just always conflating all of these things and just sort of asking to be at the center of some grand scheme. So all of that is a way of saying that I don't know if I agree with the premise that there are certain things, including cancer research and scientific breakthroughs, that will not be funded by a private sector in an atmosphere where the government is no longer the sort of main funder. And Katherine knows more than most people alive how much of the development of space over the last 15 years has been private sector. It's been when Barack Obama kind of got out of the way and said, okay, we'll allow the privates to go do their private spacey things. And now space for the first time in a generation or three is looking really interesting and full of dynamic development. I think that the way of looking at the RFK Jr. Cancellation, ransoming, good word, of contracts here, regardless of what one thinks of him or the concept even of government research, in the time that we live in right now, in the kind of political time, the use of the federal government as retribution, and also the ability of someone like RFK, who's a crank on a bunch of different issues. He might be right on one issue that you really care about, but he's a crank on all the other ones, and you know it in your heart. Come on. So if you have him at the head of a very important kind of research-related thing, it's a sign that we no longer live in this kind of time where you can have consensus above it all from politics projects that are funded at the federal government. We don't. So I think what we need to do instead is start thinking of backup plans for all of that. Backup plans that rely on the resilience of non-governmental institutions as opposed to the vulnerability of said institutions to avaricious or otherwise energetic executive branches, because that's what we're going to get from here on out until the moment we don't.
But isn't it sort of the argument I think you could make is, okay, yes to all of that, but sometimes a little help in the coordinating, a little extra money to like put extra weight on something that maybe isn't obviously immediately going to be profitable, like that's okay. That doesn't really break the libertarian rules, does it? I'm John Stossling you.
As we know, I am not the enforcer or writer of libertarian rules, and won't be now. I think the model should be more X prizey. Remember when we got excited about the X prizes?
I'm still excited about X prizes, Matt. I think like more prizes is such a good idea. Like because I think one problem that happens, right, is that we want to do two things with a lot of these like government funded research or like moonshotty things. We both are saying this is stuff where the immediate payoff isn't obvious, and so we can't trust the private sector to do it. And we're saying, don't worry, it's totally going to pay off in the short term as well. And I think that's like the place that a lot of this ends up going wrong is like, no. NASA is fine because we got Velcro and Tang is like a real argument that real people really made for decades. And that's not right. That's not the way we should be arguing for it, even if you do buy the, listen, there might be something in the very, very long term that isn't going to be pursued by the private sector in the correct proportion, according to me, God.
Yes, and let's also keep in mind that the existing structure that was running on something like autopilot up until the moment that populists noticed it, or however you want to portray this, created and creates all kinds of distortions and bubbles and what would you call it, malinvestments in education and research, as you can well imagine, because you had a semi-singular customer in the federal government saying, yes, you can have these grants if you do X, Y, and Z. And so people at those institutions tailor their activities towards getting those grants. And is that what they would be researching in a sort of a more pure environment where money is going either towards pure research or towards more commercially applied research? We don't know. It's an experiment that we didn't try or hadn't tried in a while in kind of the post-World War II era of the federal government being all things to all people. So I think pragmatically we have to design systems that no longer rely on that autopilot working, and that also have some insight in the fact that was it really working in anything close to an idealized way? And I tend to think that the answer to that is no. And you can even say vaccine research is part of that without completely getting sidetracked in all the various COVID vaccine wars. I think the Trump administration, through Operation Warp Speed, got vaccines to market pretty quickly by removing a lot of regulation. I think that was to the good. But also at the same time, the amount of intellectual distortion that happened in the scientific journals over not just vaccines, but masking and a bunch of other things besides, stuff that we've written about extensively. People like John Tierney, Catherine's former boss, has written about extensively. Awful. Like the central role of the federal government in setting the intellectual and educational and peer pressure tone in all of this turned out to be disastrous and censorious, and not something that was one-sidedly beneficial to scientific discourse. So we need to create new systems, one that allows for more private kind of competition, but insulates from government whimsy.
I also think, and this is a little bit off of the central question from the questioner, but you see this with charity too. And
yes.
I think we obviously had just a sort of big upheaval around the canceling of foreign aid spending, and especially stuff like PEPFAR and some food aid, where, kind of normal, well-intentioned people were like, oh, no, we're not trying to help the starving African babies not have AIDS? That seemed like that was maybe a good thing that we did. And I think, I was so struck as that was unfolding by the fact that there's no incentive in the current system for private actors to step in there, because if they do step in, that will show the U.S. government and the world that government spending isn't necessary or isn't as necessary. And that's the last thing that anyone wants if they are the kind of person who wants that to be refunded, right? There's this sort of vicious cycle where there are plenty of players who could step in on an emergency basis and keep the actually effective programs going, but they're not going to do that because they need to demonstrate that only the government can do it, when in fact it is not true that only the government can do it. I think that's true for scientific research too. There's all this scientific research that is publicly funded, but the only way to find out if the private sector would pursue a bunch of that stuff is to definitively end public funding for it. And most people just aren't willing to do that.
I would add a final thing. What RFK is doing at HHS, what Elon Musk was kind of doing in the early days of Doge, and just sort of like canceling contracts and ending departments, or at least a couple. And what Donald Trump is doing with the international global economy, it's large scale changes. There's something inherently hubristic about this approach. We're going to smash stuff. We're going to break it. And sometimes there's an idea about what replaces it, and sometimes there is not. But regardless, it is a large change. And there used to be kind of an instinctive American understanding that if you're going to make a large shift, we might want to kind of slow down and think about it a little bit. It's certainly not a conservative idea to make such a radical change. We have lost that in our kind of executive branching of national politics at all times, and everything that we talk about is national politics, even if it's local crime somewhere. And so the analysis about why making large hubristic changes at the seat of central government is unwise, those analyses are still kind of true. That instinct is still useful to come back to. It's just not being currently reflected in national politics.
All right. Thank you, Matt. And thanks for watching.
Thank you, Katherine.
Reminder that the Reason Roundtable comes out every Monday, and we answer one of your questions every week. But you should check back here on YouTube for bonus question segments like this one. If you would like us to answer your question, you can send, Peter Suderman would like me to say, your short, succinct, pithy, and not very long question to podcast@reason.com. That's podcast@reason.com. Thanks for watching. And I am joined today by the illustrious Matt Welch, my current boss. Nope. I wish. Try that again.
Yes. I love that, and we should keep it.